Welcome to the Stumbling Spirit, contemplations on the path of resilience. Whether you realize it or not, you are resilient. It's your birthright. As you take in your next breath, know this truth. It's not only about your capacity to overcome difficult situations, but it's about your courage to do the necessary work to heal, learn, grow, and move forward. What you gain is invaluable wisdom. And it's through these hard stumbles in life that we often discover a new purpose that aligns with our spirit. My name is Fabio da Silva Fernandez, Reiki Master, Mindfulness Coach, and Mystical Explorer. Join me weekly as the Stumbling Spirit podcast highlights the lives of extraordinary people like you, sharing transformative stories and beneficial practices of resilience to guide you on your wellness journey. Qi is the universal life force. It's the cosmic energy that flows through all things. This concept is present in several Asian holistic modalities, including Feng Shui. With origins in China, this ancient divination practice dates as far back as 4000 BCE and is still in use today. Drawing upon elements of the natural and celestial realms, Feng Shui is said to influence the flow of energy in our physical world, such as where we live and how we arrange our furniture, to clear up blockages, restore harmony and balance, and enhance well-being and good fortune. Leigh Whiting is an expert in this complex art of energy flow. She is a professional Feng Shui master and teacher and founder of Sunstone Center. It's a pleasure to welcome my friend and Reiki teacher, Leigh Whiting, to the show. Hi, Leigh.
Hi, Fabio. Thanks for having me on your show.
I was first introduced to Feng Shui by Lillian Tu, who wrote a pocketbook way back in the 90s. And I remember picking it up, reading through it, and becoming super paranoid, going back home, rearranging my furniture and everything. But it was a book that I referenced several times during that era. So that was my introduction to Feng Shui at that time. Could you maybe describe at a high level, what is Feng Shui?
Yep, for sure. And just so you know, I am a big fan of Lillian too, and I tend to follow her, we call it schools of Feng Shui, meaning it is more traditional, which means it came from China, and we actually use the compass and follow energy lines and land formations. It originally started for grave placement in China because the belief was, if you buried your ancestors in their best directions, it would bode well on the descendants. And then it eventually changed over to what we call live dwellings, where people actually inhabited spaces. And again, based on compass. A lot of the stuff that you might read in the West, they don't use a compass. They use a method where they deem the front of the home would be north, and they talk about the back left corner being wealth and the back right corner being relationships. That's not the traditional method. And as a result, a lot of people in the West can't use what we call the flying star feng shui, which is a moving energy. And so I use compass, which means I can layer the moving energy, and Lillian too does as well. And that's actually considered the most powerful form of feng shui. And I would liken it very much to astrology. It has to do with the movement of planets, the position of magnetic north, not true north, but magnetic north, and the pull of energy on our bodies. It has an effect. The way energy moves through a space has an effect. And there's years and years of practice before we had a lot of the things that we would talk about in the West, like paint colors and furniture placement and, all these objects. They didn't actually exist thousands of years ago. Kind of like when people talk about a bathroom being bad. I am mindful that there's a drain there, but here's the thing, a bathroom thousands of years ago is not the same as a bathroom today. In fact, the idea of a pot in a corner, yeah, probably not a great energy, especially in the wealth area. But nowadays, do you know who has lots of bathrooms? Rich people. So we have to understand that as times change, you take the principles, but you adapt them. And so when we're using feng shui, we are looking at the time and space as well, which doesn't get talked about a whole lot. But we do have to be mindful of what period are we in, What's the animal year? What's the element year? What are your personal elements, which means which directions resonate more with you, and then what would be going on in those directions. So it's actually a whole layering of information about energy. So that would be the traditional feng shui that I practice.
I do want to get into those specific aspects of Feng Shui with you, but I really just want to ask a couple of foundational questions. So, can we start by exploring what is energy?
So I think most of us understand we are made up of mostly energy and fluids, right? So feng shui actually means wind and water. And so what they're talking about is how does wind or water or wind and water impact space and people? So again, if we were picking a place to say build a home, and we're in China, so in North America, we would liken ourselves more to China than India. India has a different version of feng shui called Vastu, and they're more concerned about the water in the south. So China is what we would look at. And the biggest concern is the cold north wind. So if I'm going to build a dwelling, I would want to protect myself from that cold north wind because it would be detrimental on our life. Same with water. I have to have water to live. We have to have access to fresh water. And so when we talk about dowsing, which is connected to feng shui, we are looking for those fresh water lines so that we can sustain ourselves, that we can grow things, that the environment that we're looking at, that there is an energy there to support life. And so that's really what kind of the very basics of feng shui is. If again, you think wind and water or dragon's breath, we might call that, or chi or prana. And so even when we're looking at a home, one of the things we would say is if I submerge your home in water or if wind was to come through, we want that energy or water energy to flow through the home. If it comes in your door, picks up a hardwood floor, and then right out a back door, we know that money comes in and money flows right out. Or maybe it hits a staircase, it tries to go up and then it flows right back out. And so we can usually translate that into what's going on in your life by looking at the environment of your space based on how the energy would flow. Even in, sleeping. If you have a good direction for sleep, meaning it's calming on your body, we also have a good energy that gives us energy when we're working. There are negative energies that pull on your body. So just where you were developing in the womb at that time, the alignment of the planets, certain directions sort of pull on the fluids in your body and they make you very fatigued. So we want to make sure you're in a sleep direction that's good for you, not too active because you would think too much at night, and not to the point where you're not really sleeping and you wake up fatigued. So we're always looking at the flow of energy. It's just from different aspects, but it's always the flow of wind and water that we reference.
Let's talk about the manipulation of that energy, right? So you talked about true magnetic north, the cold north wind, how we are positioned in our home as far as where our bed is, how we're sleeping. So can we talk a little bit more about the manipulation of energy and how that actually works?
Sure. I mean, there is going to be some basic stuff that I can't move, right? I can't change where north is and where that pull comes from. So we definitely work with that. If we have the benefit to build a house or choose a house, we're going to take the direction into consideration. So each of us has what we call our birth chart, and it's a formula that works out which energy you're connected to. And then connected to that will be your four good directions and your four bad directions, we'll say. And so we try to align a house that makes the most sense for you, including if we could match you up with your ideal house. Now, it gets tricky when there's more than one person in the home. So traditionally, you would have favored the patriarch of the home. Nowadays, what we would say is whoever the money maker is, because originally it would have just been the men that would have made money. Now we acknowledge it's not that it's just the oldest male, it's whoever brings in the most money. We want to favor them to support them because they support the rest of the household. And so we'll do things like figure out where the best place to have people sit at the dinner table, for instance, or when we're setting up a bedroom, making sure that we can align with one of their good sleep directions. Now, is it a problem if your partner has an opposite direction than you? Yes, because your four good directions will be your partner's four bad directions. So we can usually work something out where we can figure out which wall this person could sleep straight, that one would have to sleep on their left side or their right side because you can aim towards a corner. There's usually a way to get two decent directions. We just have to get creative when we're looking at their charts versus where the placement of things are. So it's more like you take the information and you use it to your advantage. And then we would look at things like what element you are. How can we create an environment that best supports your element? And kind of knowing where those spaces in the home are that are connected to you. So the Northwest is always connected to the patriarch or oldest male, Southwest, the oldest female. And so it's interesting when I tell my clients, oh, this is your area of the house. So if we clutter this up, you're going to put stress on that person. Almost without fail, people will say, yeah, that does bug me, or yeah, that does bug my partner. So we very much can correlate an area of the home with a member in the home.
That's really fascinating. This is clearly very specialized and complex esoteric knowledge. And, you mentioned some elements of Feng Shui that include astrology and energy and the elements. So I want to unpack that a little bit with you just to make it a little bit easier for me to understand, but also for our listeners. I mean, you explained what energy is, but I'm just wondering if maybe you could explore qi in relation to feng shui and perhaps yin and yang and how that plays into it. So let's just talk about that first.
We can start with that. It is one of the very basic building blocks. I have a certification program, so I do certify people in Feng Shui. It's a gold standard program with the International Feng Shui Guild. And one of the things we have to cover is certain basics, which I do. We do talk about qi and the different names for it and how, energy moves around the earth, the wind, the water. We do talk about yin and yang, that we want to balance that. We don't want a place to be too yin and we don't want a place to be too yang because that can be disturbing to people. So a yin place would be very dark and cold and quiet, whereas a yang place would be very bright and loud and active. And although there are times when we need those things, you couldn't be in one of those environments all the time. If you were in a loud, bright, active environment all the time, it would become too much. And then conversely, a too yin space would bring you down too much. And so one of the first things we do is balance out what we call yin and yang. So maybe there's too much darkness in a room, so we'll bring in a light or we'll encourage windows coverings to be opened up. We might change a paint color, or we would look at the material in a room too. The next step from yin and yang would be what we call the five element theory. In Feng Shui, the five elements are water, wood, fire, earth, and metal. And there's three different cycles that we work with on how those interact in a space. And so when we're balancing the yin and yang, we also bring in the elements. Some of those elements are stronger. If you think fire and metal, those are more yang elements. And then when we bring in earth and the wood, that would be a more yin element. And then water can change, right? Water can be liquid, it can become mist, it can become ice. So that one's a little bit more adaptable. And then we have ways of balancing that out. When we map somebody's home, we look at which part of your home is connected to which element. So, for instance, the south is always connected to fire. And I can either bring more fire in, and there's lots of ways to do that. It doesn't have to be paint a wall red. We can bring in candles. Electronics represent fire. And then I would look at what element supports fire. Well, it's wood. So we might bring in a wood table if it was a dining room, wood floors, actual green plants or pictures of flowers, things that would support the energy of the space. So it's a whole layering, but for the average person, we do break it down. We have maps that give them very clearly. Here's a 3 by 3 grid. It gives you 9 spaces. South is a fire, put more wood and less water. Not no water, but less water, because water will destroy the fire. So it is simple once you have the basic concepts down. Can you do feng shui on your own? Sure. You just got to make sure you're reading the same vein, because if you start mixing schools up, you're going to have some trouble. But as long as you're sticking to one, there's lots you can do. But it's not even just feng shui. Feng shui is one of the elements of energy, or what we call luck, and that's connected to what we call earth luck. So feng shui, earth luck is your environment. We have heaven luck, which is fate, and then we have what I like to call humankind luck. It's your actions and attitudes. So fate is fate, things will happen. But if I wanted to bring in feng shui, say to get a new job, okay, so I'm doing feng shui, that is my purpose. My action or my humankind luck, I have to send out resumes, right? So it's actually about supporting intention and bringing in those elements of feng shui with your actions and attitudes. That's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you talk about luck and the three layers of luck. Can you explore that a little bit more with us?
Yeah, sure. We call that the cosmic trinity. And so, yeah, so the big one being fate. We can look at based on birth charts as well. There will be certain indications. For instance, I'm a metal ox. I know that I'm vulnerable to smoke. So ideally, I'm not a smoker. I'm also susceptible to circulatory heart issues, which, yeah, that's the case. My daughter, who's a water, she is susceptible. I think it's alcohol is the thing you would have to worry about, and kidney issues and eye issues. And she did have kidney issues as a baby and then eye issues. A lot of times they show up later. And, I want to kind of caution it, similar to like in astrology, you're a whole person. You have DNA, you have environmental factors, you have life experiences. This is just a sliver of the whole, right? And so even when we look at these basic personalities, and I can do a birth chart and I don't know the person, but based on your birth chart, I can tell you lots of information about you. The only time it's off is if there has been some kind of tragic experience in the youth that altered the personality to survive the trauma. That's the only time I might see a bit of a departure, but otherwise, people are pretty amazed at how much you can tell about a person just from that birth chart. And that, resonates with that energy. And so, again, that falls in that earth luck, right? That earth luck feng shui. And then, like I said, layering your actions and attitudes, they work together. Well, ideally, they work together, right? You don't want to, like I said, have me come in and feng shui for a job and then you don't actually apply for a job. When we do fertility, there would be certain areas I would be looking for chemicals in the home, usually the west because that's connected to children, and usually the southwest because that's connected to the female. More often than not, I will find chemicals stored in that part of the home. There's also some moving energies in that flying star that we would want to avoid. And my joke used to be like, okay, there's a bunch of things we can do for fertility, including clearing out chemicals. There's things like put green sheets on the bed, an elephant walking into the room. There's some other things we can do. And I used to joke and say, now you do your part. And on one consult, the woman pulled me aside and said, and it was an arranged marriage. They hadn't known each other very long, maybe a month. And she said, yeah, he can't perform. And I am thinking, I should not have been your first phone call. I think you want to go to the medical doctor, right? So, all the feng shui in the world isn't going to fix a medical problem. That is your actions and attitudes, right? So, that's a really good example of, yeah, we can do things, but they do have to work in conjunction. And, I am a big believer if you're meant to have a certain baby or meet a certain person, that's that heaven fate luck that we don't necessarily know a whole lot about. We just get indications from when you were born and what you were born into and that kind of thing.
Where does the zodiac come into play in this?
So that's based on birth. And so we have an energy called the Grand Duke. And wherever the Grand Duke sits, so right now it's in what we call the sector Southeast 3. So each direction, cardinal and intercardinal, there's 8 of them, are divided into 3 sectors. So last year was the year of the dragon, it was in Southeast 1. This year it's Southeast 3. Next year it will be South 2, which makes it a horse. And wherever that energy sits, there is an animal, and that becomes the animal of the year. And I find it interesting when people say, like, for instance, this year, oh, it's a snake year, it's my year. No, it's not. Like, it's not your good year when it's your animal's year because the Grand Duke is sitting on you. So you actually will have obstacles this year. Now, worse is when you're confronting the Grand Duke. So there's always an animal that's directly across, and that is deemed to be confronting the Grand Duke, and that's your bad year. So you would leave extra time that year. You would be extra cautious that year when you know that it's your bad year. It will pass, but it's it is funny to me. Most people think that, yeah, my animal year is my good year. And that's fine. I mean, again, your actions and attitudes will play a role, but obviously my clients know better. And there are some things we could put in place. And then it's just like astrology. We know when certain things are in certain positions. So, we can talk about this is a snake year. And so if you think the snakes hide, but when they come out, right? So in a snake year, they come out, we have transparency. So I would expect a lot of transparency. We also expect a lot of political tension in a snake year. Notable snake years were 1941, Pearl Harbor, Martin Luther King's death, 9/11 was a snake year. We're in a snake year right now. So that already gave me a heads up that politically there would be issues. If we look at the United States, last year they had what we call, because we associate them with the West. So in your home, you would have all the directions. So I would care about the West. Last year we had a disaster transformation energy. So it's like something seemingly disastrous, and it can be, ends up changing things. So you could lose a job, but you get a better job or a higher paying job you wouldn't have had if you lost your job. Kind of sucks you lost your job. And so Feng Shui tries to get you a good package or not make it for very long. But when we look at the global aspect of Feng Shui, the West, being the US, had that disaster transformation energy last year. Now it has moved to the Northeast, which is kind of Russia. And then what's moved in is a relationship energy. Now, in the period before, period 8, which is 2004 to 2023 or 2024, that was a good energy. But now that we're in period 9, which is 2024 to 2044, that relationship energy is actually turning to be a negative. And so for me, I would look at the West has some negative relations. So relationships are going to have some negativity. And so we are seeing that worldwide there is some relationship issues going on there. Bigger still next year, conflict is going to move to the West. So we look at these as heads up, so to speak. We're also, when you talked about yin yang, we are shifting into a yin energy. And that means the yang countries. So the US is considered a metal, which is very yang, whereas we're considered north, we're water, we're more yin. The earth places are more yin, so China is starting to kind of come back on top after being less. So we're going to see a shift in powers too. So when you ask how the astrology comes in, it's kind of like that. We look at what's going on and then we would apply it to global worldwide events. Because we're now in a fire period for the next 20 years, it favors industries like AI. That's going to be huge in this next 20-year period. So is energy. Energy is kind of rising. Feng Shui would be part of that. Energy medicines, we're going to see breakthroughs in technology. We're also going to see a rise in that feminine energy. We don't mean overtaking, we just mean becoming an equal partner. And so I would imagine we will eventually see a female leader of the US in this next 20-year period. We have the most female leaders of countries and companies than we ever have, and that will just increase. So you're going to see a pickup in that feminine energy. Now, that said, it's also going to be a problem in some places, and we are seeing that, whether it's with Roe versus Wade being reversed or women not being able to get educations in certain countries. So, we can connect everything going on in the world to the astrology side of this feng shui information as well.
So we were talking earlier before this interview, very briefly, and I had thought that I was a water ox, and you corrected me and you said, no, you're actually a fire ox. So could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, happy to do it. And the reason I knew yours right away, you and I are in the same birth year. So we're both oxes, which, we're super kind and dependable, a little bit naive because we give people second, third, fourth chances. We work hard. We're great at starting things and great at finishing them. We might get a little bored in between, but we will get there. And when we look at the element, so if you Google, yep, we were born in a water year, because right now we're in a wood snake year, for instance. In our year, it was a water year. But there is a difference in males and females that were born. females being a metal in our year, males being fire, which is interesting because fire destroys metal. So I was never good at dating people in my age group. Now, the interesting thing when we look at the an element of the year, I would liken it to what we call a rising sign in Western astrology. So we have the influence of that element, how it combines with ours. So me being metal, I'm not quite as harsh as a typical metal personality because water calms metal. So for me, there's an influence there. You as a fire, that water is your destroying element. So it's almost as if you have to work twice as hard at everything. You don't have as much, we'll call it luck, as the typical person. Not never, but it's almost as if you have to like, you'd be the person who learns from your mistakes because you'll make the mistakes. Now, it is the best way to learn, but it just seems like, yeah, your efforts will probably be doubled somebody else's. And then we look at, the personalities too. So I always say to people, don't just rely on that Mandarin placemat for your birth year information either, because it's not based on a January 1st date. It changes every year too. So that's worth noting. So for instance, this year started January 29th and it's going to go to February 16th. That's when it changes next year. Sometimes they'll use the February 4th as the Chinese New Year, but it's actually following a lunar cycle. So someone who was born in January or February, I would want to check. They might not be the animal they think they are. They might be from the year before, right? Now, that said, if you're within 2 weeks of that changeover, I would have to look at all four, the elements for both years and the animal for both years, because you'll kind of borrow from all four traits. The closer you are to the middle of the year, the more like that trait you are. And then as you get closer to the next year, you would start, lowering and going into whatever the next thing is. That's why not every person born in the same year is exactly the same. We can go right down to the day and hour it'll be associated with something, but yeah, I think it's important for people to know you can't just Google this stuff because you might not know what you're reading. So when we talk about your element, it's like the basis of you is this, and then we look at these other sort of influences. And so sometimes it's good to borrow, being a metal, it's good to lean in a bit more to my water side to be a little bit more flexible, right? A softer metal, if you will. And same with you as a fire, you could borrow some of that water so that you don't become that out of control.
I mentioned earlier that you are my Reiki teacher, and I was thinking about the relationship between Reiki and Feng Shui. So there's the energy element, and of course, as a Reiki practitioner, we go through the energy centers of the body, we clear up blockages within that system, which are also called chakras. And it made me wonder, are there chakras within a space, a physical space?
Sort of. It's what we were talking about. When we map out your space, I know that fire energy lives in the south part of your home. Earth is in the southwest, metal is in the west, and we have to balance it accordingly. And they're connected to certain things. So, south is connected to fame and reputation, but it's also connected to body parts like eyes. It's also connected to the middle daughter. So, like, it's like a chakra, right? We know, like, the solar plexus is connected to our self-esteem and our power source, so similar idea. We just wouldn't call it that. And actually, as part of my training, we can learn to clear a home based on feng shui. So we can figure out the element of a home because elements are connected to every part of feng shui. And so, like, what we would call the birth date of the home and the direction of the home, then we know the energy of the home. So if I had, I don't know, I guess a water home, I'm probably going to clear it with a metal clearing tool. So I'm going to use a singing bowl or a Tibetan bell. I might follow with a spray too, just to kind of add to the water element. If I was clearing a person, I would want to know what their element is and see if I'm calming them, am I supporting them? And just going in spaces, my students that I train, because I train in Feng Shui, and yes, I am a Reiki Grandmaster and I can train up to Grandmaster, as you know. I do kind of say to my students in Feng Shui, at least do level one so you know how to protect your energy. And you can kind of start feeling the energy stronger because that's what Reiki does. Because it's really hard to go into someone's space that has energy. And everyone can do this. You can walk into a room and you're like, whoa, like what just happened in here? There was a fight in here. Or, you can feel if it's been very stagnant. I want my people to be very protected. So if they are going to add the clearing aspect, and we're not talking paranormal clearing, we're talking using the feng shui concepts and, raising the vibration, we absolutely add Reiki training to the feng shui trading because they go hand in hand for sure.
To my listeners, what do you think of our conversation? Have you had experience with Feng Shui? What are your thoughts on energy and being able to influence it? Just DM me on Instagram at The Stumbling Spirit with your thoughts and comments. I'd love to hear from you. So, you were talking earlier that this is the year of the wood snake, and you were talking about the irony of the energy of this year matching previous years where certain events have occurred in the past. Is there anything else that you could share of significance about this year that we should know about?
Yeah, 100% I can. And so, and understand in some of those years, it might not have been a wood snake year. So we do pay attention, like it's called a 10,000 year calendar because there's energies that move on different cycles. And before they start over again, it'll be 10,000 years before you end up at the same thing. Because the animals are 12-year cycles, but these elements are 9-year cycles. So are the flying stars. So just so you know, they're not exactly the same. Now, when we look at the snake year, we would look at their qualities. So I talked a little bit about that, the hidden part. So transparency will become a thing. The other thing about a snake is it sheds its skin. And so the interesting part about that is it feels like it belongs to you because it's the shape of the snake. So, and it's kind of painful. You let go of the skin, you got to leave it. And so most of my clients are middle-aged women, so they'll know when I reference this. But I will say to them, do you know who Mel Robbins is? The let them theory based on Cassie Phillips' poem. If you understand the let them theory, then you will nail this year because that is what the snake year is about. It's about letting go of the things that don't serve you so that you can be your authentic self, right? We're no longer putting on these, what's the best way to say it? Like to fit in with people, right? Becoming who you think they need you to be. If you're not being authentic, it's not an authentic relationship. Brene Brown said, the opposite of belonging is fitting in. If we're fitting in, we're being someone we're not truly, it's not who we truly are. Whereas belonging is being accepted for who you are. That's what the snake year is. It's sort of shedding and letting go, letting it be, even though it might seem like part of you, and just really questioning who am I authentically? In a snake year, you want to find your authentic self. We say it's a cautious year too. There's like a meme or something that went around about the double-headed snake, that it is often referred to as a double-headed snake this year. And that says, imagine being bitten by a poisonous snake. And instead of treating the poison in your body, you're hunting down the snake to explain to the snake why it shouldn't have bit you. That would encapsulate the energy of this year for sure. The other thing about this year, we do look at another element. In the flying stars, we have accident illness in the center, and that sort of affects everybody. And so we're just saying caution. We're going to see a pickup in illnesses, mainly because people have been more lax about washing your hands. There's, people getting on planes sick. I think people are dosing those kids with Tylenol and sending them off to school. And a lot of my clients will be saying, like, yeah, I had Norwalk, I had the flu, respiratory, COVID, like all these measles outbreaks, we would have expected a lot of illness this year and food issues. But that's the other warning for this year. And so not so much in Canada, but some of the places we would get our food, simply a matter of, remember I talked about the humankind energy? Just wash them. Pay attention to recalls. It's a little scary that the US has done some firing that have limited some of the things in check for that. But when we look at it from a feng shui point of view, it's right there. That there would be this pickup in things, that there would be some kind of transformation piece going on, transparency pieces, and all of that. They do go together. So when I look at this year, I go, lots of accidents and illnesses and transparencies and political tensions, and just be my authentic self.
You mentioned a few times about the flying star. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So flying stars is considered the most powerful form of feng shui because it has to do with time and space. And so we will have what we call an annual star. So all the stars are going to sit in certain spots for the year. There's also a monthly version. And so every year my clients get a video from me talking about what's happening, as each of these monthly stars move and we look at the combo. Each star has a number and there are 81 combos that can happen. And so when we see something land in a certain space, it's either going to affect the life area connected with it, the person in the home. So I'm always concerned with what's in the Southwest because I'm the oldest female in the house. And then your animal. Well, my animal sits in the Northeast. So, we pay attention to what's going on in the areas that affect us. I have my front door in the north. That's the career area. There is robbery loss there. So I'm taking extra precautions this year with cyber stuff, making sure my door is locked, securing my client files better. And it was interesting because I do check locks when stuff like that happen. And we actually had to replace two locks that we didn't even realize were kind of broke, like in the middle of breaking, we'll say. Yeah, and my clients all report that when I warn them, like, hey, you got this energy at your front door, please check your locks, right? There's also the period flying star. Depending when your home was built or renovated, it gets a certain number. And then the direction your home faces gives it these other numbers. So my students just a couple weeks ago learned how to do, we call them flying star charts. So it's like a 3 by 3 grid with 9 boxes, and there are 5 numbers in each box. And so we learn how to plot those numbers and how to read the numbers and how to look for certain combinations. So we can either put remedies in place or we can take advantage of something good going on there. And so that's what I do every year when I update. Most people just practice the annual flying stars. Some of my repeat clients every year when we do this are good at doing the monthly flying stars. And so I just tell them what to beware of or what to take advantage of, including renovation. That's a big one. My clients will say, can I renovate here this year? And depending what star is sitting there, it's not a good idea if it's a negative star. You'll set off a bunch of stuff. And so they'll wait for certain years when I tell them it's a good time or not. I send little red envelopes out to my clients, and I've created cards with all the objects about all the flying stars, and we move them around the house. They can get the objects too, but that's something my clients do to take advantage of understanding which feng shui energy is sitting there. I think most people, probably you included, knew the basic layout of feng shui, that there were just certain life areas, but not as many people know that these energies move in and out. And I'm pretty sure it's because when they brought feng shui to the West from the East, because they took away the compass, I believe the thought was Westerners couldn't use a compass, and perhaps, because the low pan is in Chinese, that would be fair. However, we can use other compasses. I don't know if they were just wanting to keep we call it the magic of the flying star because it's so powerful from the West, or like I said, maybe it was simply the way that the low pan was created. But if you're using the Western way of mapping a space, you absolutely don't want to use the flying star because if you apply it with the wrong mapping, you could accidentally trigger something unknowingly because you have done feng shui based on elements being set a certain way, and that's not actually the case. So it could really cause, it's like you have just enough information to be dangerous. And so if you're going to practice flying star, I highly recommend someone who's actually doing compass traditional feng shui with the flying star, not the black hat or Western feng shui. They both have a place. You just can't combine them if they're not both using compass.
You touched upon it a little bit earlier, but I think now would be a really good time for you to maybe talk about the Feng Shui course that you offer.
So I did my original training, oh my gosh, 2006. Back then I did real estate and we had continuing education, and I thought, oh, that would be an interesting continuing education thing. And I found a master who actually did a whole training course. And I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do this, rather than take a 1 day course, I'll do the whole training with her. And I convinced her to take me on as a one-on-one student rather than wait for the next course. And she agreed, which was amazing. And so I got this great one-on-one training from her, and she was a member of the International Feng Shui Guild. At the time, I didn't realize it was that Western feng shui. And I didn't even understand the difference for a while because my house happens to face north. So just by fluke, my house does match the Western mapping. And so I was able to follow it for years. And then I started learning about Flying Star. And at the time, very few people taught it, or at least that spoke English. And so for a while there, I was one of the only English speaking feng shui practitioners who could do Flying Star. I learned the patterns, I learned the formulas. Sometimes it goes too deep. And I even, when I teach my students, I'm going to go deep, but in practice, we're going to end up here because it's too much for people. If we got right down to like, the minute and the days and the hours and all those layers, you just wouldn't do it. So we do make it very practical, but I do teach them that deeper layer. And so, in doing that and working with my clients, it became really evident I was one of the few people who could access this information. And so there became demand to teach others because really the information that I provided, you would spend about $10,000 bringing a feng shui master over from China. And I have lots of people who are like, you could be charging more. This is what people, especially celebrities, really wealthy people practice feng shui. In fact, feng shui was only available to royalty and wealthy families up until maybe the 70s. It got a little bit more accessible. And so, in having that demand from people, I kind of created a course. But at that point, I was a member of the International Feng Shui Guild. I'm what they call a red ribbon professional. You have to write an exam, and I think you have to get over 85 or 90% to become accredited. And I saw that they had a criteria for what they call a gold standard training program. And so I actually got the information and I designed my program to meet that gold standard with the International Feng Shui Guild. Now, I didn't check recently, but I believe I'm still the only gold standard training program in Canada, and I'm one of about 20 worldwide. And I'm currently running a course, and one of the board of directors from the International Feng Shui Guild took the Flying Star portion with me because they're already trained. And it's interesting, she has decided to take the whole course, so I had to catch her up a little bit because she realized her Western training really did not help her with this Flying Star. And although she's understanding the Flying Star and I'm teaching it very well, she's realizing how much she doesn't know because she didn't do that compass part. And I do teach the part she knows as well. I understand her training. And so she's retaking that with me. But even my graduate students, one of them is the director of the Feng Shui Guild as well. They're very highly trained. I know that I support my students every year. All my former and current students get to do an update with me when I do the next year's Flying Star information. I write it in October. We usually have a meeting in November so that we can set everybody up for the year. And my understanding is I'm probably the only teacher at the International Feng Shui Guild that continually supports my students. In fact, I know that our main person at the guild said, my students love me. She's like, you don't understand. Like, we don't hear that. And that is really satisfying to me because that was my goal with my training. I want my students to do as well or better than me. I provide the foundation, and then the students are encouraged to take it and go where they want. Because you could just do landscape feng shui, you could just do date selection feng shui, and some people do. As long as you have the basis from me, I'm happy that you can go out in the world and do this for a living. So that's my program. It's 10 days, it's about 60 hours, and there's ongoing support with it as well.
What is one misconception that you would like to clear up about Feng Shui?
Yeah, it's that we're not there to tell you to paint your wall red and move your furniture. I think that's like probably one of the biggest concerns, especially it's usually one partner, almost always a female partner, bringing me in, and the other partner is concerned I'm going to make them move furniture and, like I said, paint walls. I know in Western feng shui they lean a little bit more in paint colors, but like I had said earlier, paint didn't exist thousands of years ago. So there are other ways to bring in elements without relying on paint. I can provide that information because some people do want to know, okay, where this is, what's the best color here. But there's a bigger component because remember, I talked about that humankind energy. Yes, we could paint a red wall in the south, but if you hate red walls, it almost neutralizes it. So you're really not getting a benefit because your hate of it is going to neutralize any benefit from it. Conversely, if you love a red wall and you're going to put it somewhere where we ideally don't want that much fire, but you love it, that energy will play a role, and we'll just bring in some things to tone it down with other elements, right? So it's not like you have to paint, and it's not like you have to change a paint if you love it, but that actually is the number one concern. The only other thing that kind of comes up, it's not that it's a misconception, so to speak, but there is something called a peach blossom formula in our feng shui practice. Typically, you use it for a soulmate. I have had people use it for pregnancies and jobs, but there's something called a reverse peach blossom where you can dissipate a relationship in a non-harmful way. Most of my business clients will hire me to do that to sort of have an employee leave them without having to fire them. And it's got to be mutually beneficial. So I want to be clear, this is a very kind way of dissipating a relationship. My number one request is how do I get rid of my son's girlfriend? By far.
That's
It's
hilarious.
like I cannot believe how many requests I get to get rid of my son's girlfriend. Now, for the most part, I can't help them because she would have to live in the home or you'd have to be able to get into her home. But I do think it's kind of an it's an interesting request. And I feel bad because once they learn about this formula and how we've used it, I was talking about my one client who her sister moved in with them, but it wasn't working out. But if they kicked her out, she couldn't keep going to school. So we're like, oh, what do we do? I'm like, oh, let's do the reverse peach blossom. And so then 2 weeks later, her boyfriend proposed to her and asked her to move in with him. So that's what we mean. Like it was just a win-win. And then they all go, oh my God, my son's girlfriend. It's like, oh gosh. So that one just, it cracks me up at how popular that request is.
How do you see Feng Shui being used in the modern world? I mean, you talked a lot about energy. This is a very ancient practice. What is the pitch for someone learning about Feng Shui for the first time?
So I always come back to feng shui is a lot of common sense. Well, some of it wasn't so common in the early days, but that's what it was based on. If I'm going to build a house, I might want to protect it from the north wind. Now, here's the thing. We have indoor heating now, so it's not a necessity. However, would my heating bills probably be better if I had sort of a mountain in the north to protect me? Sure. Some of them are cultural pieces in feng shui. So, for instance, the number four is an issue, but that's because it's either Mandarin or Cantonese, their word for four sounds like their word for death. But that's not the case here. Understanding the concept, I would have to apply it to our culture here. You might have an issue if your house number was 666 or 13, right? So there's cultural pieces that we have to follow as a practice here. There would have been at the time certain measurements for like the size of a table and size of a chair. Well, we're probably talking ergonomics. And one of my feng shui students is a designer. We were talking about that. That would have been helpful when you were building your own furniture to know to use this feng shui information to build your table and chairs. But that's usually taken into account nowadays. It's just part of a manufacturing process. So I think people don't understand how much feng shui has been incorporated. We tend to like sort of a meandering energy. We don't like these hard straight lines. In fact, straight lines don't exist in nature. And so we try to mimic nature. That's a feng shui practice. We know about casinos trying to draw you in with the movement of the carpet. You're using feng shui practices. You just might not realize that you're doing it, right? Just in balancing things out. And so we would say intuitively, go with what feels good, because that actually is my bigger indication of energy. Because if you're just reading it out of a book, but you love this thing, chances are it matches. We were just talking, you're a fire, I'm a metal. It might match that, and we just didn't even know about it, but we were following the generic book. But I was really partial to this. Well, it probably has to do with something you just didn't realize. It's not that hard to get feng shui information and implement it, but do know a lot of the things they suggest, like getting certain, coins and wooloos. I will use them because there is an energy to it. There is a belief. Millions of people look at that and they know it's attached to that energy. So I do feel you're tapping into that. But if you didn't grow up with it, I can assure you these objects did not exist thousands of years ago. It was really just about balance and harmony. So I believe that people nowadays, because we really are attuned to what we like and what feels good, is a modern way of using Feng Shui. You just aren't aware that you're using those Feng Shui principles. You can look at books. There's lots out there at this point where you can say, oh, do this or do that. And you can do that if, especially if it resonates with you. That's really what we're talking about in Feng Shui. We're bringing in an energy. We're always focused on harmony and balance. But who is the best person to decide if something brings you harmony or balance? It's you. And so we want to always ask ourselves, how do I feel about it? Me, even as a Feng Shui consultant, if I'm coming in telling you to do this, that, or the other thing, and it doesn't resonate with you, then it's not for you. And that's because there's just so many aspects. It's not just the general Feng Shui, but like our personal energy, that plays a role too. There's a piece about artwork. Everybody likes to send me pictures of artwork and go, what do you think about this? It doesn't matter what I think about it. It's like, what do you feel and think about that art piece? That would be actually a modern form of feng shui. You're following the ancient principle. You're just the best information source for that.
Can we talk about wellness and good fortune? Because that's a huge part of Feng Shui, and I'm sure that our listeners would be very curious about that. Could you maybe talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I'd say probably the things we get the biggest requests for when someone hires you to do feng shui, it's wealth, health, and relationships. Those are the big three. When we're talking wealth, often it's just clearing clutter. Like if someone was a hoarder, I'd be like, clean your home. You don't need to bring me in, just clean your home because you're blocking, right? And that's what we're talking about when it comes to money too. In fact, when we identify your wealth area in the home, whatever you're keeping in that area is probably where your extra money goes after you pay bills. And it's funny, sometimes it'll be supplements or the kids' playroom. It's like, yeah, that's where your extra money goes. I'm like, please don't keep your taxes in that spot or your bills. So we have little things like that that we would recommend. Yes, there are different beliefs to pulling things in. I think people would be really surprised to hear that almost every major bank in the world practices feng shui, and they probably have a wealth vase deep in the CEO's office at the head office of the bank. Lots of companies, major companies. In fact, I go into companies all the time after hours to do their feng shui. And, even Donald Trump is very famously quoted for saying, I don't understand feng shui. I just know it makes me a lot of money. But I also know he doesn't keep it up. So his projects will start off big, but if he doesn't understand you got to move it every year, then you run into problems. So if you are going to practice that flying star and very powerful feng shui, you do have to keep it up. Otherwise, you have to remove it. And so we can trigger things, but understand the triggering energy moves. Same with health. Health, we want to keep clear. If you're cluttering up your health area, you're cluttering up your health. And we have two health areas. We have the center, which affects everybody, and the east, which is hereditary health issues. So I'd always be looking for clutter if something's broken. And the number one issue for health, water problems. So whenever you have a plumbing problem, absolutely address that ASAP. I have gone in, maybe someone has cancer and they'll ask me about it and I'll say, okay, I would be looking for a water problem, and I tell them what area it's connected to them. And I do remember one client and he was sort of sitting maybe at a table behind. And when I said where I would be looking for a water issue, his head snapped up and I'm like, you had a water problem there? He's like, yeah. And I said, okay. I said, when did you resolve that water problem? Whatever date he gave me. And then I turned to her and I said, when did you go into remission? Same date. So he was like, I like a skeptic. I'm like, please don't already buy into what I'm going to tell you before I've opened my mouth, but also just be open-minded and hear what I have to say, because I do really believe that your house is connected to your energy and there are things in your environment that will be affected. Chicken before the egg, I don't know, but I would 100% be on water issues. I would be absolutely keeping things clutter-free, broken things out of there. And same with relationships. That one's a little different. It would be things like in your home, especially women. I have a lot of single women who will have pictures of goddesses, all these single women I see throughout the home. Or I had one woman, she had a beautiful iron ballerina. It was a very cool art piece over her bed. And we were talking about dating, and I kind of looked at the art over her bed. So we do say the art over your bed will reflect your relationship. So most people are monogamous, so it would be two, but she had this single woman. And I asked her further. Well, she loved it. And I said, oh, okay, where did you get it? It was a gift from her ex-husband. I said, okay. We found your relationship problem, but she loved it. So we actually moved it to her helpful people area and we put something else up there. But the interesting thing is when we moved that piece from the ex-husband to the helpful people area, she said he showed up with post-dated child support checks. She could not believe it. So we do look at connections of energy. I do feel like the pieces people give you have an energy connected to it. And so you really want to think about where that is in your home. Honestly, if you don't love something, it should not be in your home. Just even you looking at it connects to it, if that kind of sort of makes sense, right? Everything invokes an energy in us. You better love all the things in your home.
Thank you for explaining that. I'm wondering if maybe you could touch upon the wealth element because I'm sure that there are people that are thinking about that right now.
Yeah, and so wealth is cyclical, and that's why we look at what's happening with that flying star energy. I do talk about finances for each animal every year and what's going on. Like right now, my warning, and remember, I write these in like October. The warning was to be very cautious and do not speculate because what you think today is going to change tomorrow. And this is October. And now we're in tariff world that changes and crashes our stock market, right? So I give that warning because I can see what it's saying, but I didn't know about tariff. Like I didn't know what was going to happen. I just knew you wanted to keep your money safe, and no matter what, please do not speculate. Even if you think you've got it, it is going to flip on you. Now I think everybody clearly understands that, but all of my people would have followed that advice because we are looking at what happened, with what's going on with the stock market. And it was like, listen, if it was me, I'd be keeping my investments very safe, very conservative. Get your information and then wait because there's more information to be revealed. Remember, we talk about that snake coming out, that transparency. Things are not as they look and they are not going to stay the same. And so we would recommend that this year. I'm not giving tax advice or investment advice to be very clear. I'm just sharing what the energy is saying from a feng shui perspective. And then just things like keeping wealth in the home. So I think I told you about, if I can open a door and see to that back door, not great. It means money comes in and money goes out just as fast. Or if there's a staircase there, we can remedy it with mirrors. Mirrors pull energy. In fact, if you have mirrors in your room, you might want to cover them because it might disrupt sleep. Energy gets attracted because mirrors represent water. So there's things we can do with energy placement. I create these checks with special numbers connected to the period we're in, which is the fire period, which is the red phoenix. I will have my clients write themselves out a check for the year, sign it. There'll be the leftover, well, we have the snake this year, red envelope, and there's a money area connected to your home. There's a couple of money areas. So we will put that. It's almost like goal setting. So we're using feng shui, but also your actions and your beliefs to pull in money. So there's really simple ways. There's certain objects we can use. We can follow where the wealth star is. So right now, it's in the east is the fame and future prosperity, and in the southwest is the abundance energy. Not as strong as it was in period 8, but we can still tap into that energy. And there's different ways that we can enhance those energies, or at least be aware where loss is. So right now it's in the career area. And so I would be cautioning against job loss this year. And we are seeing record job loss right now. The energy tells me we have loss in the career area. So I think it was the year before, the recommendation was you might want to pick up a second financial hobby or a second income, which would tie into this year where we know we have that loss energy.
So, this is a podcast on resilience cultivation, and I really think through who to interview for the show. And I interview a gamut of different people with different areas of expertise, different life experiences, and different stories. And I really felt that it was important to have a conversation about energy in terms of understanding how it can support our resilience. So I'm just wondering if you could share with us, what do you think resilience means, or what does resilience mean to you?
Sure. I think resilience has to do with, I usually connect it with resourcefulness. how do we solve problems? And we don't always have to do those alone. So it's using those resources. So I very much would connect feng shui to that is the more information I have and my understanding of what is beneficial or where I can pick up beneficial energy or where I would maybe need to temper something or have a heads up, if you will. We always say it's like a seesaw. So, if things start kind of going this way, we got to do things to boost it up. Maybe it's my bad year. So I'm already kind of down. And then, maybe I'm sleeping in a bad area or I have a bad energy at my front door. I'm going to start doing some of the things like maybe use a different door that year or put off a major decision to the next year. It can be even things simply as going in a negotiation with someone. I do have someone who does labor negotiations and they know how to do the calculation of directions and they often have access to the people's birth information. She will calculate everybody's good and bad directions and she'll make sure her team is in what they call a power direction and that the other side is not. And she has had some record negotiations just using that. And for me, like anything that's drawing on your strength is a form of resiliency. When we talk about that Grand Duke energy, it is important to know you shouldn't face southeast for this year, last year as well. Even if it's your best direction from your birth chart, not this year, it's not. You would use your second best. And there was a guy, and I can't remember his name, my apologies on that, but he studied battles over the years where he could see where the two armies were meeting and what directions they were facing. Anytime he came across a meeting for a battle where like one side was confronting that Grand Duke energy, so if it was this year, it would be the army walking and facing southeast, they lost 100% of the time. In every battle he went back over where he could pick up that someone was confronting that energy. And so I think that's really kind of cool because this is an older energy. There was a time China was very, very powerful. They 100% used this information when they were going to battle, right? Feng Shui is based on the I Ching and this sort of magic formula, if you will, that's connected to the flying stars. A lot of that information was destroyed. So I actually wonder how much we're missing that's just kind of coming back or was handed down from oral traditions. But all of Feng Shui was designed to put you and your family and your ancestors into a powerful position so you could use the strengths and try to minimize the weaknesses. And I really think that's what resiliency is, right? You're pulling on strengths and trying to minimize weaknesses or weak points of entry. And so it very much goes together in my view.
One of the things I'm exploring this season is the relationship between resilience and survival and how they're similar, how they're different. And I'm wondering whether you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. And that, kind of just what I was saying is there were very powerful people who used this energy for exactly that, winning wars, conquering, building wealth, protecting families. There's a huge piece about the ancestral lineage. And that's why, like I said, it started with the burial practices. The belief if you buried your loved ones, your ancestors a certain way, it would predict how the family would do. Now, I do go, it was only the noble families and the royalty that had access to this information, but you can very much see it in practice today that you are helping your family. And I think that is part of resiliency. It is in your relationships with others and how you're using them. Even when we looked at that element that I talked to you about, I will tell people within the home, based on everybody's elements, how you would interact. Like, oh, you need space from this person because they're going to drain you because that's your destroying element. Or, we have two metals in the house, me being one of them. Wow, my metal dragon and we can clash, but 2 seconds later, be like, oh my gosh, look at this dress, so cute. Meanwhile, my poor water and wood, we have a monkey and a rooster, whereas we're dragons and oxes. We're the bigger animals, if you will, and they're kind of our more gentle. They're super bothered by it. So we have to be very mindful. But if you were going to kind of take our family as a whole, who would you put in certain positions? Well, the metal dragon and the metal ox are the people who would be the ones sort of protecting. We're the doers. They are our feelers. They can take care of the background stuff. We would know if we were looking at our family unit, here are the people who we would put in these positions. So I like the idea of even hiring. A lot of times people will reach out to me and go, I'm looking to hire somebody. Who should I be hiring to help me? And we'll look for who your best support person is from an element standpoint. A lot of time it's dating. Who's a good match for me? We will look at the animal, but we'll also look at the elements, be like, pick a supportive element for sure, not your destroying element. And so I will look at that as well. And I would definitely connect that to that resiliency of, again, using information. What are your strengths versus what mine are? Again, this is a sliver of it. And I would put those into play 100%.
What are your practices of resilience?
Well, I'm also a psychotherapist, right? So I come with that background, which is interesting because my animal says I'd be good at that. In fact, I do better when I do multiple things. For me, they all go together, right? Transforming lives in meaningful ways. So my practice is I practice Feng Shui. I very much care about people's, animals and energies. I can also tell there are certain traits of people that I can tell what their element is. Somebody who has a real sense of justice or a kid that says that's not fair, they're probably a fire because that is their thing. They fight for the underdog. They fight, against injustices in the world. Metals are very cool, matter of fact, direct to the point. Yeah, that's me. I have to remember to soften things a bit. Makes me a good therapist because I'm not going to crash with you. But, we like organization. We like doing multiple things. I do that practice. I have cards and objects. I do move those around every month. I do listen to my videos that I record in October to go, oh yeah, what do I have to be aware of this month? And I will absolutely practice it. If I have a heads up about car accidents, I will not take a long road trip. I will be very focused on my driving and I will keep my driving to a minimum. If I'm going to go somewhere, I've got a helmet on kind of thing, if that's my warning for sure. So I heed the warnings that are coming up in the feng shui.
You say that you heed the warnings and how Feng Shui is a part of your resiliency practice. So maybe this question might sound a little bit silly, but how does it benefit you?
Because it puts me in the best position, right? If I can minimize, remember I said it's about minimizing and using the strengths. That's what I'm doing when I'm doing that. Where are the strong parts? What are the things that are going to get me through versus the parts that might be weaker or non-beneficial from me? Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty resilient person to begin with because I am a metal. It's actually my nature. So I don't have to fight it as much or have to pull on it as much. In fact, I always say resourcefulness and resiliency is probably one of my best traits.
How can people reach you if they want to contact you and sign up for your courses?
I would say Sunstone Center, re.com. So sunstonecenter.com. I also have another site, I am holistically, leigh.com. I'm in the middle of a course right now, so it would be a wait list for my next feng shui course. And as far as bookings, they can reach out and then we would arrange for a booking to do an online consult, or I have people who are trained. I have lots of consultants who are available.
Professional Feng Shui master, Reiki grandmaster, and registered psychotherapist Leigh Whiting. Thank you for coming on my show. Thank you for sharing your insights, your wisdom. And it was such an absolute pleasure chatting with you and learning more about Feng Shui.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to The Stumbling Spirit, Contemplations on the Path of Resilience. This is Fabio da Silva Fernandez. Join me again next week for another episode of transformative stories and beneficial practices to guide you on your wellness journey. If you wish, you can follow and DM me on Instagram at The Stumbling Spirit. Until next time, take a deep breath and another step forward on your path of resilience.